Welcome to the first day of the American Gem Trade Association's Dynamic Seminar Series. Stuart Robertson is an award-winning graduate gemologist and appraiser. For the past 25 years, Stuart has directed market and price research at Gemworld International, publishers of the GemGuide. Today, he serves as president of the company. Stuart is a member of the Scottish Gemological Association and senior member of the National Association of Jewelry Appraisers. He's also a member of the Accredited Gemologists Association, and technically, I think, until later on today or tomorrow, he is still their immediate past president. In 2011, Stuart received the prestigious Antonio C. Bonanno Award for Excellence in Gemology. He received the AIJV Valuer of the Year Award in 2014, and the Scottish Gemological Association's Catriona Orr McInnes Award in 2019. Joining Stuart this morning is graduate gemologist Brecken Branstrator. Brecken is the editor-in-chief of Gemworld International's GemGuide publication, the industry leader for gemstone pricing, market information, and trends. She has written about gems, jewelry, for more than a decade, and has dedicated herself to, next page, to covering the colored gemstone sector in depth, from topics like supply and pricing to responsible sourcing developments and other issues of interest. She has traveled extensively across the United States and internationally to attend trade shows and conferences, to visit brands, and to source market firsthand. Please join me in welcoming this morning our first two speakers of the Dynamic Seminars, Stuart Robertson and Brecken Branstrator.
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you for the invitation. We thank the AGTA, and we thank all of you for coming this morning. So good morning to you all. Good night. And we're going to let you know straight up front that usually this talk is kind of lighthearted, fun talk, look at the market. This year, there'll be a little bit of a change to that tenor in a few spots. Just there are some serious considerations that we have to discuss. There are some things that are going on that have a direct impact on our market, and they are generating a certain amount of really uncertainty in a number of factors that have a direct impact on our industry. So we think we'll just jump right in because we are concerned about some things going forward as how they'll impact the colored stone market in particular. Let's take a look here. Okay, so why are we not advancing? Let's go right here. Here we are. First thing, this came out just a couple of weeks ago, the announcement from basically the summary of the January Consumer Confidence Index, and it dropped. It dropped significantly. It now stands at the lowest it's been in 14 years. That's significant because that means it's even eclipsing the level that it dropped to during COVID shutdowns. All 5 components of the index deteriorated, driving the overall index to the lowest it's been since May of 2014. Consumer confidence is something that we look at on a regular basis as the numbers come out from the Confidence Board because it is a reliable indicator, in our opinion, of the strength of business, especially for mom and pop independent businesses. And our jewelry industry in the United States, even though you hear a lot about the big brands and stuff, it is the mom and pop independent jewelers that drive the jewelry industry in the U.S. That is the bread and butter, that is the backbone, that is the neighborhood stores. High prices on household staples, it's no surprise to anybody, have cut into the discretionary spending. This is a market where we stand right now. We saw basically a change what's active today is either the really high-end scarce product or it is the low end. The kind of middle of the road that was the bread and butter of our industry has been very stagnant now. It's become very stagnant. And that's something that concerns us because we've had a few periods in our history where that's gone back and forth. But, you know, we are a little bit concerned about that. High prices were already curbing the appetite of retailers to invest in purchases beyond immediate needs when the importation of virtually everything became more costly for U.S. consumers. And we're looking at that. This show is going to prove to be an anomaly. This show is going to be a pretty good show, especially for the American Gem Trade Association, because goods that are already in the country and are what are basically trading. We spent the last day and a half walking around talking to people during the setup, as well as yesterday during the open at 3 or 4 of these shows, and we got the same pattern. Individuals that basically had U.S.-based offices and are selling goods that have been in the country from their stock are doing well. People that for the first time brought goods in on a carnet are having difficulty because this Tucson for the last 5 decades has been a show where if you buy something, you typically get to leave with it. We'll talk a little bit, we've already alluded to it, tariffs. There is a direct impact that we're starting to see form on our industry. As all of you know, last spring, the U.S. government dismissed established trade agreements with allies and adversaries alike simultaneously. And I figured, well, what could be the impact of that, the outcome of that? I mean, smarter people than me are doing this, so I'm sure they've picked the appropriate weapon for this trade war. And I can tell you that just a week and a half ago, there were reports in Reuters and the Wall Street Journal that confirmed what we already suspected. To date, 96% of the tariffs collected by the U.S. have been paid by U.S. consumers. And that is leading to a situation where the price of goods are now going to be going up. It is also, we suspect, going to lead to a situation where materials are going to have the potential of increasingly selling overseas. We are already starting to see trade agreements realign. I'm sure all of you heard about the trade agreement, the EU and India, the Canadians discussing now with China. So there will be direct impacts on our industry. The U.S. industry for jewelry was the largest consuming market and still is. But if we see a realignment of things, it's not clear to what extent that's going to continue. We suspect all of this will get resolved pretty quickly because you noticed after the EU and India inked their deal yesterday, it looks like the tariff rate on India is going to drop from the 40% or whatever it was down to 18 now. But a lot of people don't realize that last year at this time, there was 0 tariff on loose colored gemstones. So it's still an increase that we will all pay and that our customers will pay. As more and more of the stockpile here is depleted and more material needs to be replenished. We also spoke with several dealers during, as I mentioned, the setup here, and they elected not to bring materials that were not already in the U.S. There's been a lot of dealer-to-dealer trading before the show's open, so this show is going to be a pretty good show, but that's not going to be a true reflection of what's happening because we're depleting at a rapid rate now what's already here. Brazil still, I think, has a tariff of 50%, and that's a major supplier for our colored stone industry. We did speak to a dealer from a Brazilian firm, and this is the first time his goods are on a carnet. We spoke to somebody from Sri Lanka yesterday, first time that he brought his goods on a carnet, and as soon as people ask, he gives the pricing and everything, but explains he can't deliver it, he'll mail it back. That kills the deal. Because the price is not really the price, because when it comes back in now, there's going to be a customs payment due. So we don't know what the prices are going to be on a lot of material. And this is why I say it's a little concerning, because this is impacting our industry in a way that's becoming more and more clear what's going to happen as we go through the rest of the year if these things don't change. We can look at a couple of things related specifically to India, because we're getting some hints from this. The Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council of India recently reported, and this was picked up on a couple of publications, that their 2025 exports, last year, exports to the U.S. declined 44% from the year earlier. Now, the reason that's interesting, though, is that the overall exports from India basically changed virtually none. It was almost a zero effect because they simply were getting demand from other markets for those goods. So these are not impacting the suppliers, it's only impacting us at this point. Another thing that we're a little bit concerned about is the direct impact this has had on metal prices. Now, you all know metal did correct a little bit since this slide went up that showed gold at over 5,000 an ounce. So it corrected down to the upper 4,000 range over the last couple of trading days. But that's still double where it was this time last year. Silver is still 3 times where it was this time last year. We were recently at the Vicenza Oro show in Italy, and you're seeing multi-generation gold manufacturers, manufacturing jewelers now, working in silver and titanium and ceramics and things like this because the price of the metals have gotten very high, precious metals. It would be fine if this was driven by supply and demand from the industry, but it's not. A lot of this big run-up in metal prices was a direct result of the investing into metals as an alternative protection because people are increasingly trying to figure out a defense to what they perceive to be economic chaos. So where this goes, I don't know. I suspect metals will correct down, but they won't go back down to the levels they were this time last year because there is still this sense of concern in the economy. Prior to this, the jewelry industry and technology, were main drivers of metal prices, but that's not what's happening now. We're also seeing, as a result, as I just mentioned, not only are we seeing alternative metals, but we also saw a lot of signs in Italy that we found surprising. Companies that had signs that this style is available in 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 18, or 22 karat. And that had me thinking, because there were other signs, super lightweight. And then you'd take a look at the curb link chain, and the top was curb link, the back was hollowed out, the thing looked like a Jell-O mold. And that's not going to be something that is really, I think, a good thing going long-term for our trade. I understand why it's happening. It's the metal prices. But as a colleague mentioned the other day at a talk that I was attending, our industry is built on the marketing and sale of items that have no practical purpose. We don't actually need any of these items in the sense of they don't get us from our home to our office, they don't feed us, anything like that. We have them because they make us feel good, and we like the idea of passing them down. If something is super lightweight or charm the size of a quarter being advertised as 1/2 gram, I was afraid to heft it to see what that was because I thought it might float away. So it gets, it does get concerning for us. We understand why these things are happening, but quite frankly, if I had any say in the matter, I would suggest that the U.S. jewelry industry at this point approach the Federal Trade Commission to allow items of lower caratage to be sold as gold, because at least you'll have something that's a little bit more substantial and is not going to fail and become damaged quickly with just normal wear, as some of these items look like they will be. Now, this is only, again, focusing on certain product. We still have a very high-end level of this industry that is consuming solid pieces and very expensive pieces, but that's not what most of us have as customers. It's really not. And so we do have some concerns about where things are going. So what's the bright spot? You know, I mean, we're having so much fun up here already, talking about all the exciting things to see. Well, colored gemstones, it sounds like an ad for the AGTA, but it's really not. We've been looking at this. Surprisingly, I did a talk for NAJA just a couple of days ago. There are very few colored stones that you cannot, varieties that you can't plot the 20-year price trend and see a strong trend that even if you account for inflation, those products have gone up. Now, if you take other diamonds, you see a lot more volatility in the diamond market. If you take lab-grown diamonds, you see an anchor off of a freighter out in the middle of the ocean because they are, in 2017 to today, have lost 99% of their value, at least in how we've monitored the price. So it's not something I would have necessarily anchored my ship to. Small gallery-based designers, major jewelry brands, colored stones are becoming the main profit center. We have, I think probably the last time we did a major study, and we look at, trying to project global market and U.S. market. For a long time, the same number you saw reported was that color was 9% of the industry. It's a much bigger part today. You see a lot more material in the market today, colored stone varieties, than just the birthstones. This category has really evolved. It's a very good time to be in the colored stone trade. We're also, and it fits perfectly with the evolving styles that we're seeing. Tastes in jewelry, like fashion, have brought in among young generations to include not only traditional but also newer designs, materials, incentives for buying, or another area that we've seen. Newer designs in personal expression and body jewelry, many materials not previously used in jewelry are seen in these designs. Point being that we just mentioned titanium. I saw gemstone set in steel in Italy. We saw it in ceramics. So the use of steel and titanium and some of these other materials wasn't new, but setting what are better quality gemstones into them is a newer trend. And it is something that reminds us that jewelry is more than just the precious materials. The industry is seeing greater use of non-traditional mediums. Designers no longer focused exclusively on gold, silver, and platinum, but are now exploring new materials and doing more of this with limited designs. This curates a sense of demand always exceeding supply. It's a smart move. Their marketing is about the story of the design, the sourcing, the materials used to create the finished jewelry. The story about an item and how it's sourced is now an important incentive for many consumers. Consumers believe they are helping to support communities where raw materials are mined. Is a popular and growing reason for people to interact in our industry. And with that, I'm going to turn over for Brecken to talk a little bit about some of these alternatives.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. So poor Stuart had to do some of the heavier conversations, and now we're going to take it a little lighter into some of the trends we're seeing within finished goods and color. So as he mentioned, we're seeing a lot more metal alternatives, really interesting materials. We can see here this really beautiful lock. Marla Aaron, you guys might know that designer. She did a collection where she partnered with a porcelain company called Nymphenburg and did a few of her pieces in porcelain. It's quite beautiful. So we're seeing things like porcelain and ceramic as metal alternatives. Interesting materials like leather and wood even, finding ways of bringing down the costs of their goods. Interestingly, over the past year plus, we've been hearing a lot more wholesalers talking about interest in beads. Obviously, you can buy something for a more affordable price, but still get really good color. And indeed, that's what we've been hearing is trending, is the really saturated beads still, whether that is whole bead strands or designers finding ways to sort of incorporate beads into their gold chains to reduce the gold amount and still sort of adding their design touch to it, which was really interesting. Stuart mentioned, of course, more metal alternatives that we're seeing, more options in Caragold. Titanium, I would say, at the high end has been a thing for a while for some of these designers, but we're seeing a lot more designers try to get into that. More use of silver. I think we all know that the price of silver has gone way up too, so the designers that were already in it are sort of trying to adjust within that, but more turning to things like stainless steel and silver and setting them with fine stones, which is kind of interesting to see. And anybody who's been to this talk for the past few years knows that Stuart and I have been talking about the increased use of, or the increased, buying across the board. So when we've been walking around the past few years, if you go up to a handful of wholesalers, they're all going to be giving you different answers of what's been selling. So we've never seen anything quite like the varied buying that's been happening the past few years, finding their way into new and interesting materials as they're looking for color substitutions and sort of more affordable pricing for their customers. And something that I think has been really interesting that's happening lately is an increased use of the opaque stones and hard stones in new ways. Things like they're using it sort of, we were seeing enamel for a long time, and now they're using hard stones as sort of inlay for design effect. A bunch of reports coming out of the watch shows last year were saying that they were seeing more watches. As we can see here, this one has lapis and chrysoprase on the face of it. A lot of color on these watch styles, not just an enamel and lacquer anymore. And of course, we continue to see use of, just big, colorful stone combinations and cocktail rings and twat ma rings, that kind of things. And interestingly, one of the shapes that's taking sort of form right now in terms of trends is elongated shapes. We sort of started hearing that in diamonds. Honestly, when Taylor Swift got engaged with that stone, we were hearing a lot of wholesalers saying people were asking for it, whether they can find that and source it or even afford it. We all know is a different question, but elongated cushions was popular, and within color, we're hearing a lot of things like pears and kites and ovals, anything like that, which is kind of interesting. And I did want to touch on estate and antique jewelry, because right now, I think across so many of the different spaces in the jewelry industry, people seem to be talking about estate and antique jewelry and how popular it is right now. So we did a story on it last fall, but what we were finding is that people are starting to go to the antique and estate shows. This was especially true in Hong Kong starting about a year ago. Our reporter there said that he was finding a lot of people going to the Japanese pavilion to source from there to source stones. So they might be taking the stones out and resetting them. They're looking for goods that they maybe can't find elsewhere. So they're sourcing metals and stones for more affordable price points if they can't find them. More designers and retailers are also getting into it. So they're either buying the goods and sort of redesigning them to their own look, or for retailers, they're also finding that it is reducing their costs or offering sort of a new way into a new consumer. So they're accepting, trade-ins and that kind of thing, and maybe applying the value to a new good, or finding ways to repurpose some of their family jewels, maybe, and going from there is sort of a more affordable price point for them. And Stuart mentioned the growing market share of color, and within color, we're also noticing that bridal jewelry is playing such a huge role right now. I've heard a few retailers and wholesalers say in the past year, there's been a few of them that have mentioned the share of their bridal being 15 to 20% of color right now. So it's really growing, and one of the things we've noticed over the past few Vegas market weeks has been how popular that's been. Now, of course, sapphire and maybe even emerald remain the top, but what we're seeing is really interesting material enter this space as well. I think outside of the big three, the number one, I would guess, is Montana sapphires. That seems to be everywhere in bridal. But we've also seen things like zircon and spinel, even some garnets pop up in bridal, some tourmalines. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that is going to move. And we don't really even see that as price related as much as sort of this consumer focus on story and design and finding something that's unique. So I think that'll keep growing for sure. And I did want to touch on synthetic color, not to sort of be alarmist or anything, because this is from a very small base, but as an editor who sort of tries to pay attention to the conversations that are happening. I've been hearing a lot more rumblings of synthetic color within the past year, I would say. So just anecdotally from wholesalers, we've been hearing that they're seeing, parcels of colored stone melee that are synthetics mixed in with naturals. But what I think is really interesting is sort of the use of synthetic color that I'm seeing in design now. So last year I was a judge for one of the design competitions, and in the first sort of round of judging, we had about 60 entries, and 4 or 5 of those were synthetic colored stones at the center, which I thought was very interesting. And we also did an article last fall highlighting 5 female cutters, just asking them about their careers, and 2 of the 5 said that they've noticed an uptick in customers looking for synthetic color. Now, that might have just been people looking for more specific colors and being able to find it there, but I did think it was interesting to hear 2 of them say they were getting more, especially synthetic corundum. And of course, we have to talk about sort of the trade show relevance. Stuart mentioned what we've been hearing around here as we were walking around for what the tariffs are doing, but interestingly, even before I think the tariff conversation came into play, we were sort of hearing a reshuffling of, even in color, people prioritizing maybe smaller new shows, good places. Gem Geneve and In Horgenta especially were popping up. Gem Geneve has doubled their footprint last year. It's sort of offering a new place to discover new color, and it's really design. In Horgenta is really design driven as well. So those 2 have popped up in conversation. And then as we entered sort of the pre-Tucson time, people were talking to us about Hong Kong. So we actually did hear a few people who opted out of Tucson this year in favor of Hong Kong, more favorable costs of the show. And we were noticing that it was starting to grow back in importance again as the market started picking up. So we'll be really curious to see what happens in March. And Stuart mentioned we were talking to some people yesterday, and one of the wholesalers in GJX said that he finds that whatever happens in Tucson happens every show from there on. So I think we might end up seeing in Hong Kong, however Tucson goes in terms of buying and selling play out in Hong Kong and Bangkok as well. But all of this is to say that we are hearing more people focus again on some of these international shows as well. So we'll see what happens there. And just in terms of some of the international developments that are shaping this space right now, usually during this presentation especially, we have more to report about source country activities. In the past year, there's been less so in that news cycle. Obviously, we've been focusing more on the tariffs and what that's coming into play, but we were seeing things like Malawi and Zambia both. Zambia set then rescinded a 15% export duty within about a month. But Malawi did put a halt on their gem exports as they tried to reevaluate their export process, and that continues today. That's been about a year now that they've been doing that, from what I hear from someone on the ground. And then we also have things like the rising costs of labor and mining is really affecting supply. Some of the big miners we know are seeing a lot of unrest on the ground with the locals around them, stuff that's really cutting into supply in an already tight environment. So of course, naturally, that's just pushing the prices higher as well on top of everything else. And just to look at some of the technology shaping this space right now as we look at the colored stone market, obviously we see blockchain for tracking. That's the big one. A lot of miners using that to track their stones all the way through. AI is really growing in this space. We know that there's AI for diamond grading, but increasingly in color. They're now using that for the origin determination of emerald, ruby, and sapphire at some of the labs, and to identify heat treatment in some of the labs as well. Tech is also playing a smaller role in exploration. This is just sort of a small anecdotal thing that I think is really interesting. Obviously, right now, everybody's waiting for the next big find, and we haven't heard anything for quite a while. But there was an article in, I think, Gems and Gemology about a year ago about the use of drones in the exploration of peridot in Canada. Obviously not applicable in every situation, but I thought that was interesting as we are all hoping for another find. And the guy who did it did say his quote is, "The future of ruby and sapphire exploration, at least as I see it, is being developed using a combination of solid, tried and true geological approaches customized to target corundum, in addition to using modern tech to increase efficiency." So let's hope they find another big sapphire mine. And obviously, the big conversation, traceability and transparency. I bring this up because one of the big trends we've been seeing in this space is more miners collaborating directly with designers to create these mine-to-market collections. This is something Gemfields has been doing for more than a decade, but we're seeing a lot more players come into it. A few of the miners that are here, Cooperine & Co. did a really interesting collaboration to sort of bring awareness to their green Cooperine tourmaline. As we know, the supply and pricing of the Windex blue material is very tight and very high. They launched that with a few fine designers. Cruzeiro, of course, during the pandemic, turned inward and decided to start working more with Brazilian designers, so Brazilian stones with Brazilian designers. And we can see this beautiful bracelet here, one of my favorites from a Brazilian designer, Richard Fisman, excuse me. Stunning bicolor piece. So that's something I think we'll see a lot more of, too, in this mine-to-market conversation. And along the same lines is this idea, an increasingly tight supply as well, of what it means within responsible sourcing and the trade's role of how to use more of the material and be supporting the trade by buying more of the material. And so I think this is an interesting screenshot that I grabbed from Instagram that says, "Do you think it's ethical for the industry to use only a small % of mined gemstones?" But we've been seeing increased use of sort of a range of qualities anyway. People are more open to buying the included material. They're more open to buying the interesting material with the growth zones and that kind of things. And as we talk also about what's happening in cutting, you know, the trends towards really innovative, really different cuts also works really well for this material as well. So I think there's gonna, I think it plays really well into this space, and there's going to be a lot of overlapping things like we saw some diamond beads, octahedrons, you know, this thing like here, freeform shapes from independent designers. So I think these two will really play off each other well. And then just look ahead at what we think we're going to see over the next year or so. We've heard a lot more talk about orange and yellow gems recently, so I think that sort of colorway might come into play this year especially. A lot of carved gems in fun shapes, whimsical uses. I took this picture because it's one of my favorites. This feels like as good a place as any to say, I have a birthday next month and I really want that animal cracker. It's so cute. But a lot of designers are looking for these really fun things to set them apart. Along the same lines, fantasy, one-off cuts, innovative, that kind of thing. And I do think that men's jewelry will keep slipping more into the mainstream. Now that we're through our rounds of award shows, we keep seeing the men play with interesting brooches and interesting jewelry. So I hope that becomes a big thing this year as well. And I'm going to let Stuart close it up, I think, with a little bit more.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we'll talk, we're getting close to the end here now. We'll just go through a few things. I did want to touch on a little bit about what Brecken mentioned on some of the larger scale mining companies, and they're working with designers. We mentioned last year during this talk that trend of more color being produced, and this is not a good or a bad thing. I'm not making an editorial comment. I'm just sharing that we've seen a greater amount of production coming in colored stones from large or larger scale minings operations, and that does also influence price. We mentioned last year that 90% of the labor accounts for about 10% of production now, and that's the small scale. Large scale mining has got a bigger financial advantage. It's a more efficient way of mining, but it does also kind of lead to a situation that we are seeing become even more apparent, that you introduce your material into the market through invitation-only auctions, and there's a direct correlation to the price. We saw this with De Beers. The only reason I'm mentioning this again is that now we've after talking to a number of dealers, we heard pretty much the same thing. Ruby has been priced out of the market for anybody other than the high-end stores. But the vast majority of independents can either buy smaller rubies or no rubies at all. This does have a direct connection to one of the other comments that Brecken made, and that is we're seeing more gem materials of their different qualities being purchased. I would say that that's probably the biggest driver of the Montana sapphire trend that's very strong again this year. It's those blended colors, it's those party colors, it's the unusual zoning, because people want something that looks different now. And Montana, Australia, a number of these sources produce the majority of that material, and it's doing very well in the market. We've talked to a number of corundum specialists, and blue sapphire, which last year we listed as probably, the strongest seller, out of every 10 sapphires he sells, 2, maybe 3 are blue. The rest are either party colored or one of the fancy colors, with pink and orange, pink and yellows being particularly popular right now, as well as the blended blue-green kind of teal colors. So that's just a kind of a side note there, because we are seeing a lot of emphasis on, especially from the design end of the market, on these unusual colors that in the past were considered, commercial quality. After more than a decade, GemGuide just put Montana Sapphire back in, and we didn't include the commercial quality because we figured if people tried to grade it under traditional measures, they would think it was all commercial because of the zones. But the actual attraction that's driving the market for that material is those unusual presentations of color. It's almost, it's practically unique in the sapphire market. Again, don't want to sound counterproductive, but I think from our standpoint as, people that kind of monitor market trends, that's our business. We don't buy or sell stones. You all know that. We're a market research company. We focus mostly on trends and prices. The reality is at this point, for the colored stone industry in particular, it is the colored stone trade is a global industry. The tariffs do have a potential to drive more and more business to shows that take place overseas. Brecken alluded to that earlier with her comments, because we did speak to a dealer. I'm not going to say who he is because it's probably not fair, but he said that this is 2 shows now, because he agreed that the U.S. goods, the material already in the country pre-tariff, are doing very well. But the material that some of his colleagues in the same row he was exhibiting with, as I said, they're not able to sell anything. So you're going to have, because people won't buy if it's on a carne, so you're going to have some people that do very well and other people that are here only because we all have to commit to our booths after the show. So they made the financial investment, they came, and they're not really performing very well. His concern was, because this is not at the AGTA, this is across at a show that has a lot of international vendors. His concern was if the trade press afterwards is that a lot of the business, wasn't good, it's going to sink the other shows and the tenor of business itself for the rest of the year. If a lot of the international exhibitors go back and say they didn't sell anything, people may not take the time to connect the dots to the tariffs. They may just think that the industry has slowed down dramatically, and that is a concern. So we will touch on this in some of the reporting that we do, not only for our publication, but in support to the other publications in the trade, because there is a robust demand for color, but there are real challenges that have nothing to do with our industry right now that are kind of, that are quieting that conversation. As we said in the very beginning, for the U.S. product, it's going to do well at this show. The AGTA show in particular, for that amongst, AGTA is also pretty much recognized as having a lot of the finer dealers from the U.S. market. You do see really nice goods here, but more importantly, because of the very nature that it is limited to U.S. firms, they're going to do well. We said that in the very beginning. It was already apparent yesterday. People were having very strong opening days. We did want to talk a little bit about the concern, though, that as the market consumes these stocks of inventories and material that are here, then replenishing them is going to come and become apparent what the cost of that is if the tariffs remain in place. And you're going to have the same stones selling at two different price points, whether it's in the U.S. or whether it's in the overseas markets. The only reason that matters is for high-end, for jewelers that focus on high-end goods. Consumers that buy high-end goods can travel out of the U.S. to purchase them. So, we do see it having an impact at every level of the market. Again, not throwing stones or anything, but it was reported at the end of last week that the trade deficit has now grown to be the largest that it's been in decades. And that also is concerning because it's not, we're not seeing especially as relates to the jewelry industry, we're certainly not seeing the benefit that was promised from this. We're seeing a lot of disruption, and the consumer media is starting to pick up on it. I was approached about an interview. I'm still thinking, because I always measure what's good is going to come out of it, because I don't censor any information, but I get concerned about sound bites. And if the whole comment isn't going to be shared with the public, then I tend to be a little cautious not to make any comment. But anyways, we did want to talk about some of the things that we think are going to do particularly well this year. We've already touched on a little bit. Sapphire, especially the fancy colors, going to do very well. Yesterday I was walking through a show and I got hit in the back of the head by a rock and reminded that zircon, especially the orangey brown material, some of the brown colors, the colors other than blue, and we've known this too, we touched on this, zircon is doing very well. The price, for a while it was the blues, but now it's all the colors of zircon are doing well. Those kind of plains colored and brownish straw colored stones, they're beautiful because when you buy zircon, you're buying a really bright presentation of color. And so the zircon is doing well. The prices have gone up, but when you look in terms of other stones of those colors, it's still priced very favorably for competing against some of these other colors. Garnet we see doing well. There's still a pretty good appetite for garnet. The rhodolites are doing pretty good, but the appetite has shifted to a lot of the orange. We're seeing the orange. It's not just the rhodolite and the greens now. We're seeing some of the more unusual stones that were popular a few decades ago. That's seen a big resurgence. The orange material is popular. Again, there's not a lot of it. Prices reflect that, but they are still, relative to other stones of those colors, garnets are still favorably priced. Tourmaline, we've seen a drop-off in demand, with the exception of some of the teal color and, of course, the Paraiba material. And when we talk about Paraiba, we are talking about the Brazilian material. There's a good appetite for that. The material has gotten expensive, though. The really fine stones, not easy to source, haven't been for a while. Most of what you see in the larger, really nice Brazilian material, that's not new. It's recycled back into the trade. Peridot is having some couple of pockets have been worked recently that have brought nice material back into the market. So we're hearing a lot of favorable comments about Peridot. We're also hearing that I think it's probably both just because of the color and the price point. Citrine and amethyst are showing up on a lot of people's, when we do interviews and talk to people, citrine and amethyst are being noted by dealers as stones that are selling quite well for them again. Ruby, as we mentioned, a lot of people are telling us has been priced out of the market. Tanzanite, not nearly the amount of information, it's not being noted as much as it was the last few years with dealers. It's kind of slowed down again. Tanzanite's one of those stories that's interesting to us because it's a stone, of all the gems you can think of, it has got the most well-defined ceiling and floor for the price. It doesn't make huge volatile moves. It's a beautiful color. The material itself, there's still availability on it. It is a stone that I like a lot. I think it's favorably priced, and with a jeweler that's knowledgeable in the material, you can work with it and make really nice designs. And that was pretty much all we wanted to go over today. So with that, I thank you. If there's a minute or two for questions, happy to try to entertain them. Otherwise, I'll turn them to Brecken. She's smarter than I am, and we'll certainly entertain them.
I have a question. Where is it? Back there.
Starla
Okay.
Turner.
Oh,
How
hi,
are you,
Starla.
Starla?
Speak up.
What effect do you think Pantone choosing white as the color of the year impacted demand for colored stones?
Oh, that feels like a setup, because when Pantone first did that, we thought it was interesting, years ago, their color of the year, and we noted it in our talk. Then after that, we seemed like it was, and we've even said this during this talk, it has appeared to be increasingly irrelevant to our trade. And this is an example of why. There are probably materials that fit in that category, but it's not something that we've even paid attention to in the last probably, 8 or 9 years. Because the colors started to become more of a promotion of Pantone than a reflection in fashion, in our opinion. And again, this is just my personal opinion. Don't mean to offend anybody that follows that or listens to it. But we find that the greater driver of trends in our industry, specific to gemstones, is the marketing done by the industry itself, the dealers and the retail jewelers in their conversations and communication with consumers, and those especially that listen to consumers. One thing that we have found without any question whatsoever is that when a consumer walks in and asks to see a ruby and a sapphire, they are most often describing a color, not a specific mineral. So when they find out that a ruby is through the roof, we have seen a number of examples of retailers that then introduce things like rubellite tourmaline or spinel to close that sale. So we find that the trade itself is a better indicator of color trends than any of these other groups, frankly.
Question right here.
You opened by talking about how the consumer confidence had dropped sharply. And first of all, when you talk, what word was it? Was it gemstone consumer confidence? Was it jewelry consumer confidence?
No, it's consumer confidence across not gems and jewelry specific, it's economy specific. It's in jobs, it's in income stability, it's in the cost of housing and necessities, because our industry doesn't sell a single necessity. If people feel that too much of their money is being consumed on their household essentials, their discretionary budgets sink to a point that, they don't spend a lot.
Okay, so it wasn't gemstone.
No.
That's good news. I was thinking it might have been dragged down because of the confusion going on with the lab diamonds with the others and so forth. I have a different question though as well, possibly for her. You talked about AI starting to learn how to identify origins and so forth. Is it conceivable that in 5 or 10 years from now, when we have the same talk, we're going to be using our Apple Watches to scan our stones? It's going to tell us our origins of the stones and possibly some quality issues about it, and will that affect our pricing?
Could you repeat questions and generalize?
I don't know, you want to take that? I don't want
Well, the question was whether AI would advance to a point that our Apple Watches would be able to do identifications. And that's an interesting question, because I think the bigger question is probably, should we be investing or encouraging in that type of thing? And why does that come to mind? Because if you pay attention to the headlines, you see the layoffs coming from technology companies. Like Amazon just laid off 10,000 workers a week ago. It wasn't in the people in the warehouse that put packages on the conveyor belt. It's at the mid-level people and the people that do the programming, because more and more of that's being done by AI. Who's going to buy our jewelry if it's all taken over by an automated process of algorithms? So I would not really, and this was a topic at GILC the other day, I wouldn't encourage this necessarily until we see what the impact is. Gemology will always need human involvement because somebody's got to check to see the mistakes that are being made by the technology, because technology is only as good as the programming, and nobody knows everything. So somebody will try it, but whether it's effective, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, next question. Yes, go ahead.
Thinking optimistically, once the tariffs settle out more favorably, do you see the recovery of the areas that were challenged at being like a very immediate and quick comeback, or do you think it's going to take a little while?
Assuming that tariffs do get resolved, and we expect them to, it's going to depend on how people feel, especially people from overseas. We know, for example, we heard yesterday from someone that represents an organization outside the United States, a trade group, that they have been approached by a Canadian trade group to see if they would be willing to participate in a proposed Canadian colored stone gem fair. And this group, because they're looking at a 30-something% tariff right now, agreed that if Canada puts together a show, they would commit to bringing their members to exhibit there. So it's going to depend on, sometimes it's difficult to unring a bell. Because again, remember, last year there was 0 tariff. So even if it settles at 10% or 15%, that's still more than existed last year. And we will all feel the pinch from that.
Next question. Art, go ahead.
The diamond world and what's happening, I think in a way is going to start with the colored stone world, and that is traceability. They're saying that De Beers especially is putting gazillions of dollars along with other people right before it, and the GIA happens to be supporting.
So the question,
The public should know.
the question?
The public should know what mine that stone came out of, and you should know the whole history of the mine, from the mine to your finger.
So the question?
Understand,
Art, what is the question for Stuart and Brecken?
the question is that we mentioned traceability, and it's something that will affect the price if the public gets convinced when they walk into a store and they want to know what mine a gemstone came out of, because they're putting a lot of
Art? Okay.
It's just a comment that
No, I appreciate the comment, but it's more challenging than would be seen, because you know what's happening. That issue is being addressed by the large-scale mining, but how many of us need to be in this room if the colored stone industry is taken over completely by large-scale mining? Because the implied reference there is that everybody else, all the small scale, the entire supply chain is corrupt from front to back, and that's not true, because this is an industry that's more than just a few weeks old. The trade in gem materials and precious materials for for basically personal adornment goes back thousands and thousands of years. Nothing survives that long if it's simply corrupt. So I think the premise of the whole thing is incorrect, frankly.
Yeah. Next question. Yes.
So I think we're all aware of the impact lab-grown diamonds had on the natural diamond market. Do you see any potential for any synthetic or lab-grown colored stone to have an impact on the colored stone market?
Not to that extent, because we dealt with this issue in the 1880s and 1890s with the first synthetic rubies. The trade figured out how to deal with the two products successfully. There is some mixing of parcels, always has been. That's been an issue in amethyst, for example, but the materials still trade. Any important colored stone, larger, finer quality material, go to labs, and the labs have a good handle on separating natural from synthetic material. The issue with the diamond industry, and again, it's my own personal opinion, based on my observations, was the diamond industry was very slow to respond to the synthetic diamonds that were coming in. They just kind of ignored it and figured it would go away. That's never really a good, we would be in a different market now if they had done that in London and in Paris in the 1880s and 1890s, but they didn't. The traders took the issue of synthetics, and that was actually one of the reasons that early forms of gemology, developed, to focus on separating these materials.
Because we're running out of time, we'll take one last question all the way in the back.
I'm not sure if this is the right place to ask this question, but can you talk about the impact of the various online marketplaces for the colored gemstone industry and authenticity was sort of one of those, and how that's impacting this industry?
Yeah, it's kind of. No, it's just that I don't want to lump everybody into the same mix. There have been online trading platforms and there have been online markets to end consumers for other products that have both worked and not worked. And I think that they're only as good as the people that, basically look at the materials before they allow them to be posted. If it's a distribution system where seller and consumer both meet and that's just the conduit, then yeah, it's prone for problems. If it's one where the company that is the online network is going to have a verification step in place, then that probably provides some comfort. But, it's something that we can certainly look into and conduct a little bit more research into and actually publish something on if that's an area of interest for the industry.
The reason I ask is that eBay, for instance, everything goes through authentication, gets sent to an authentication group, and then sent to the consumer. The rest of the platforms don't have that. But I'm seeing some very expensive material now come from eBay.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. That's not the way that eBay always worked, and I wouldn't say that nobody else does that because you can. I personally wouldn't because I haven't checked with everybody else, and it's a big world. But I think people will consume products where in multiple marketplaces. In particular, though, gems and jewelry seem to sell the most from mom and pop neighborhood stores. We always think about the big brands on Fifth Avenue and stuff like that. That's not, they sell the concentration of the most expensive pieces, but unit-wise, the independent jewelry industry, independent mom and pops, the independent jewelers, the small chains sell more per units than all of these others. So that's the area of the market that we focus on. It's the area of the market that we think needs to be protected, because if that goes away, everything goes away. And with that, thank you very much.